Board and dice games and gambling games have been an integral part of culture and history. Throughout time, they have been used as an allegory to life, war, and relationships. In ancient times, most games consisted of a small board at which dice could be rolled to bed with, while another genre, as you could say, were dueling games where two players on a board would move pieces to achieve their goal. Interesting enough, no matter where you go, every culture has a unique game for each of them, with roughly the same complexity and strategy to them. Only in the latter half of the 20th century did games move to a digital form of existence. The first video game created was invented in a lab in 1958. Since then, games have been consistently improving in their technical prowess and striving to deliver bigger and better experiences. While most games up to this point were still dominated by the multiplayer structure to games, this digital transformation also brought about the single-player game. Why have another person that could cheat, get tired, or not be around when you could play anytime with a computer AI? But as games are ever improving, some games are becoming unplayable. This is because they are no longer being supported by the developers. One has to ask, with games becoming outdated as old as 3D TVs, can a game last forever? The question of if a game can last forever is a tricky one to try and answer completely rather than defuncting to a simple yes or no. Though if I was to give this video an overall opinion on if a game can be truly timeless, it's a no. But that answer may become defunct in the near future, so I cannot and will not give a definitive answer on whether a game can last eternally or not. What I can do is give you an advice on what a game needs in order to become a timeless classic rather than antiquated software that your children will stare in wonder and bewilderment at how something like this can be fun. It is no surprise that developers that rely on technical fidelity of their game as a selling point is one that will soon be replaced by the next shiny thing in a year. Games such as these are your Star Wars Battlefront, Call of Duties, and your Assassin's Creed games, to name a few. Each one of these love to squeeze out their intellectual properties in ways that resemble a quick cash grab rather than attempt to leave a lasting impression on a community that plays them, with each new title being described as having the best graphics, or the most realistic yet. These are buzzwords that salesmen love to keep cramming down the consumer's face. But let's face it, we as a community have moved away from needing more and more polygons to render a chiseled abs of some protagonist, and will instead lean more towards unique art styles that leave someone to imagination rather than something that leaves nothing to the imagination. Games that do have an art style use this as leverage to tell their story, their atmosphere, and facilitates the immersion into the game's world. This makes players more interested in the game for a longer period of time, both inside and outside the game's magic circle. But only when this art style fits what the game is trying to relate to the player, which leads into the next part of this video. The idea of game polish is a hard one to pin down, but not hard to explain, funnily enough. The idea of game polish is how complete the game is, how well it runs, getting rid of bugs, and making animations not freeze, stagger, etc. But what is most important for making a game last in many people's eyes is mechanical polish. Mechanical polish is centered on making the interface, how you control the game, interactions in the game, and movement of your character through the virtual space. This can also be boiled down to making mechanics of your game solid. This is very important in a game that is meant to be played for thousands of hours, or at least not to meant to infuriate the player of having clunky controls. Polish will also impact how menus are set up. In most cases you want to streamline your menus, if there are button prompts, and generally quality of life features that are in the game. Without polish on a game, it can lead to a whole host of problems, anything from being impossible to control, not knowing where you're going or what you're doing in a bad way, never finding a game with people in multiplayer games, DRM that gets in the way of players playing the game, and so many more things. While I do enjoy all genres of games of all types to some extent, it is true that some games are objectively better at being relevant longer in the public's eyes than other types of games. For the most part, and with my highly educated opinion, most of the time you're going to want to avoid a game with a single-player focus. Having a single-player game makes it so there's a definitive end to the game, and this can be due to the player simply exhausting all content that was in the game, so there's simply nothing left to do. With expansion packs, DLC, and mods, you can extend the life of the game, but ultimately you're prolonging the end of the game that has already ended to many others. So the answer is multiplayer games, right? Well, it can be, and it is shaping up to be the longest-lived games there are. Games like World of Warcraft, Team Fortress 2, Counter-Strike are looking to be great contenders for the longestly actively played video games, but there are other genres that can be long-lived. For example, the MMORPG is a good contender for long-lived games, but only if they have fair, humane design for their core mechanics and well-thought-out content packs to keep their game relevant. Though a game can be long-lasting in its own right with well-developed mechanics and thoughtful content add-ons, there is one thing that can make or break the well-most perpetual experiences. While it may seem to be an unoriginal thing to say that your game needs to stand out, it is still a perfectly justified thing to say. Having an original game and mechanics, approach to a genre, or a new art style to call its own are all ways that a game can be remembered and continue to play because of its unique approach to a problem. Games that do nothing that is special to them are quickly forgotten and cast aside for other games that capture the player's attention. I mean, how many times have you picked up a game because of its crazy premise, rather than continue to play the same game as always? The point that I'm trying to get is one of a salesman trying to get you to take a chance on a game, rather than save money and buy food. This idea of having an original take for a game becomes even more essential with Steam's overflowing of market titles. This is also apparent for anyone perusing Steam and only looking at the core titles in AAA games or the most popular indie games. Also, what you can tell from these popular games is that they always have an original idea at their core. This leads your mind to think of the possibility space that it can be created in this new idea in a setting, thus giving you a reason to buy, play, and then keep playing the game. A good way not to add originality to a game is to give it a novel but pointless mechanic that is superfluous to the core gameplay. Most features that are tackled in this way are ignored by the player and at worst hinder the player from enjoying the game. If there is a community behind a game, then a game can last far beyond its life expectancy. Having a community around the game can bring in modders to keep the game fresh, free advertising as the community members bring in and recommends their friends to play the game. Failing to create a community for a game can shorten its life expectancy by a significant amount, not because the game is necessarily bad, but because nobody is playing it. That being said, it is also important for a game to have a solid base of lore for a community to latch onto and create with. After all, it is easier to add to an existing story rather than create one yourself. But while a community is a spectacular thing to have, it is important to note, once you have a community centered around a game, that community has the power to make it last forever or to rot it from the inside out. What I mean by this is the toxic effect. This can act like a cancer in most player bases. The toxic effect is based out of rage, vulgar, and aggressive behavior to others in the community. This can cause members to leave the game for something else to play, and then it can detract from your new members from joining the community around your game because it becomes known for being toxic. Ways to nullify the toxic effect either requires you to have a policing force on your servers and rules against behavior that is distasteful, or give your community members the ability to police themselves. It is true that many board games have lasted for centuries, but the world of video games is still emerging from the minds of industry, and there are no standards for making a long-lasting game. What is also true is that we have yet to confirm if some games are going to last. After all, we live in a world of ever-changing technology, and we still don't know how to define what a video game even is. But that is for another video in the future. But if you think you can add to the conversation, I implore you to write a comment down below. I'll probably respond to them in an hour or two. And as always, thanks for watching.